When Vampire Survivors burst onto the scene in 2022, people had a lot of questions. What exactly do I do in this game? Why is this so popular? And who the hell made this?
Vampire Survivors is a painfully simple video game. You control a character's movement, but their attacks are performed automatically on set timers. Your goal is to kill as many of the swarming enemies as possible by being aware of when your character is likely to attack. The more you kill, the more experience points you get, unlocking more weapons and upgrades.
It turns out that this simple concept is incredibly fun to play, and Vampire Survivors quickly took the world by storm, much to the surprise of its humble Italian creator, Luca Galante.
We wanted to tell the story of Vampire Survivors from its origins as a JavaScript side project to the team that rallied around Luca and the design of its weapons, characters and levels. So we were delighted when Luca was available to talk to us, especially as the only interviews he's done up until this point were via email. There was a catch though. Luca is a private person, and while he's okay talking to us, he didn't really want to use a webcam, which we understand. Developers don't owe us anything. Some folks really value their privacy. I mean, if the man doesn't go on stage to collect a BAFTA for Game of the Year, spoilers, he's probably not going to show his face for little old Noclip. So we thought, if we weren't going to have Luca on webcam, how do we represent him in this video? How do we tell the story of his life growing up in Italy, his struggles to find work in England, and the many late nights he spent working on the game that would become Vampire Survivors?
So we did what any responsible documentarian would, and we had a puppet made. Say hi, Luca. This is the story of Vampire Survivors.
I used to play games of any kind. Really had this huge box of Commodore 64 cassettes and demos that were all full of, ripped off games, of course, that I inherited from my brother. And I would just every day just go through different games. I would just try literally everything. And then games that actually liked a lot were stuff like RPGs, Ultima series, Eye of the Beholder, Monkey Island, very, very big love of my life. And things changed quite a lot when the PlayStation came out, I think, where it became a bit easier to actually find games. Before then, I just had to go for whatever I could scrape and find in stores. But with PlayStations, even in my little town near Rome, we finally started to see video game stores, and that's where I get into more, bit more mainstream stuff, maybe Final Fantasy, JRPGs in general, really. I started to study programming in high school in Italy. I've been making games in my spare time since then, really. When I was 25, I moved to London. It was like 10 years ago, 12, more or less. And at that time it was really difficult to find a job in the video game industry in Italy, and there was very little to work for anyway. I just decided to move to London and try to find a job here. And I did find a job in McDonald's. That was great. And my English wasn't particularly good, so it was really difficult to have interviews and to actually let people know what actually I could do when it comes to programming and games. And so, whatever, just worked for McDonald's for almost 2 years, I think, until my English was good enough to finally manage to go through some interviews. And I had reached a point in McDonald's when I was just like, you know what, I didn't come here to do this. I'm just going to go for the first job I find, as long as it involves programming, even if it is gambling related. And so, of course, the first job I found was gambling related.
Despite his worries about working on gambling games, Luca really enjoyed his first job in the industry. He got on well with his co-workers and mostly spent time fixing bugs in existing games. He progressed through the ranks and found himself in a mid-level management position with lots of paperwork and office politics and much less development work. Luca was desperate for a creative outlet.
What happened then is that I was so fed up with everything, and I wanted so much to start making my own games, that I started to wake up at 2 in the morning, work on my own RPG in Unity until 6 in the morning, then go to the office do my 8 hours, and then I come back home and go to bed at 6 p.m. And that lasted for about 3 months, and I did a lot of progress.
Luca was now living two lives. By night he was a creative creature, pouring his life force into his little prototype in Unity, and by day he was an office worker, performing his job and paying the bills.
But this prototype work quickly stopped when Luca bagged a job as a technical director on a gaming startup, a job that required him to work long hours in Unity.
This was in the middle of the pandemic, really. Sorry, at the start of the pandemic. So it was really difficult to find a job. And just to cheer myself up, I just went to develop something in the language that I know better, which is JavaScript, using the engine I know the most, which is Phaser. And I just started for fun to work on, well, a prototype that at that time didn't have a name. Once in a while I used to look for stuff in the asset store in Unity or Unreal Marketplace that is just a game framework. So something that, it's already a game, but I have to script it, I have to make content for it. And you never find something that is that straightforward. So I was like, maybe I can make something that straightforward, which is super basic from a gameplay perspective, and then I can just have fun making content for. And because at that time I was playing Magic Survival on Android, I was like, well, this is super simple. Maybe I can just make this super simple thing in Phaser and see how it goes. And I did the super simple thing in Phaser, and very often when I reach that point of making a prototype, I stop. And this time instead, just decided to change the programmer art. It was just black and white circles with the assets from an asset pack that I almost always use to make prototypes. And this asset pack happened to be inspired by Castlevania. I dropped in these assets, the new prototype, and now the prototype looked amazing. I just absolutely fell in love with the visuals, with the ugly pixels getting all scaled the wrong way and muddied up, all the colors on the screen. I just absolutely loved it. And because I was having fun just by playing the prototype without having a timer, without having score, goals, experience, nothing. It was just fun to annihilate everything you see on the screen. The original plan was to make 5 different maps that were all the same. Actually, it was just a different texture for the background. And so once again, that was mostly experimental. The first stage that came up was the library. I just decided to give it a shot and see if I would actually build stages that were a bit more interesting than just an unlimited field. The process to make weapons and actually everything, but then turn into, okay, I grab a sprite from this asset pack. What is this? It's a knife. Okay, cool. But to make the simple possible projectile I can imagine with this and just shoot in the direction you're facing. Is it fun? Yes. Okay, fantastic. That's it. Next. It was absolutely random. Just pick something and throw it in there. When I felt the game was complete, I put it on itch. It was during the summer, I don't remember, before the summer, April, and no one cared. And that was upsetting because I was hoping that maybe a handful of people would notice it and maybe post a few comments. And so I was like, well, this isn't working. I did try to show the game at the very least to other people who use Phaser, and even then, nothing happened really. And so I was like, okay, if nobody's noticing this on itch, I will try to put it on Steam. I don't know, the fee is not huge, it's for, what is, 100 pounds maybe? And so it's like, maybe I'll get some more visibility on there, I don't know. And then maybe if I get lucky, I can also recover expenses, A lot, if not most, of the games I used to play on Steam, I bought them on huge sales, 70% off, 90% off. So for me to pay a game $3, £3, whatever, and then play for it for 400 hours is normal. And so I was like, look, this is a game with very little production value. I cannot sell this for a crazy amount of money. So for me, it wasn't priced in a smart way, it was priced in a fair way. The game got published on Steam on December the 17th, the day after I got COVID, so being knocked out for a couple of weeks. That was probably the hardest part, to do the to implement everything you need to actually put a web game on Steam, because Vampire Survivors was born as an HTML5 game. And so yeah, because I was feeling not great on that 17th of December because of COVID, I just pressed the publish button. I was like, okay, it's done. Bye. See you in a week.
During this period, Luca did eventually find a job. It was at a game studio called Marmalade, who worked on Monopoly games for mobile and PC. He worked as a gameplay designer, but never felt comfortable there because he felt intimidated by how good everyone else on the team was. So he decided to leave and go back to the gambling company he worked at before, except this time as a web developer. But then 3 days into his old new job, something unexpected happened.
So I think it was the 7th of January, if I'm not wrong. I went to take down the Christmas tree and I noticed a message of someone telling me that a Splattercat had made a video on Vampire Survivors.
My name is Splattercat. I sift through the file to find what's worthwhile in the world of indie games every single day so you don't have to. Today up on the chopping block, we had Vampire Survivors. It's like $3. I promise you're going to have a good time. I'll see you later. Thanks for
So I stopped trying to take down the Christmas tree and I go and see what's happening, and that's when I see the Steam data and I see that there is a spike in sales, basically, and in users, and that was very surreal. It wasn't huge, but it was definitely like 10-20 times what it used to be, and that's how it started, basically. There was an initial phase of, okay, what the heck do I do now? And I just started to ask for help to anyone just to help on fixing bugs, basically, and issues that I wasn't expecting, because if your game goes to 100 people, maybe you get 1 or 2 people complaining for a bug. Once you get 10 times as many, or 100 times as many, even if this is a very small bug, you will get a lot of complaints.
So Sam, when did you come into the picture in terms of helping out Luca?
Yeah, it was shortly after it blew up, just in terms of, helping with fixing bugs, helping with save data issues and things like that. As you suddenly got this user base growing, you've got to deal with a lot more customers with requests and things like that.
Did you meet Luca back at the early days of the gambling company, was it?
Yeah, so I came in as a student, and Luca was actually my buddy that was assigned when I joined to sort of show me the ropes. Yeah, he's kind of swooped in and saved me from that industry once the game blew up. When Lucas started doing that prototyping, and obviously through the pandemic and between those jobs, like you said before, we've all been friends for a little while, and there was a group of us that once a month, once every couple of weeks, we were just having a kind of show and tell, essentially, for our personal projects. And it was obvious as we were going through these and Luca was building what became Vampire Survivors, quite often you'd find that we're sitting and playing Vampire Survivors instead of paying attention to the next person's demonstration of what they've been working on. You started getting to the point where it's like, I can survive till 11 minutes and I only survive till 6 minutes, and sort of competing against each other just in those show and tells, playing it there and then. So kind of, yeah, even in those early stages you could see the promise of it.
Sam was one of a number of freelancers that Luca brought on, not just to fix bugs, but to help with community management, programming support, and crucially to port the game out of the JavaScript that it had been coded in for Phaser, so that it could eventually be ported to consoles.
With more people available to help, Luca could once again focus on making new content, new weapons, new levels, and new characters.
So these freelancers have been helping with porting the game to a different engine, one that could actually go eventually on consoles, mobile, and so on. Let's say that in January, the amount of people that were working on the game already, on the actual JavaScript, it was just me plus Sam and another developer for some minor bug fixing. A couple of freelancers full-time on the new engine, plus a community manager part-time. At first, I wanted a little community to chat with and exchange ideas. I have made a Discord server, and I was active on the Steam forum and everything, because once again, I was expecting 100 people, maybe 200. I would have been really happy with 200, just perfect. When it suddenly gets 2,000 and then 20,000, well, you either shut everything down or you get someone to help you with the community. And so we have Beth, who joined as a community manager, who's been doing an absolutely fantastic job since then. If the game managed to stay somewhat relevant for a whole year, it is, in my opinion, definitely thanks to everything Beth has been doing on the community side of things. So the demo on each is can give you a decent idea of the amount of content that was available in the beginning. So I think the very first version back in December had 7 characters, 1 stage, and I think 18 weapons. So considering that in the end we ended up with 40 characters, 10 stages, 72 between weapons and power-ups, 7 major gameplay mechanics that were never intended to be in the game to begin with.
Obviously, all of this comes from Luca. It comes straight out of his brain. He implements it on the JavaScript side, and then on the engine port, the entire process, we've just been playing catch up. It's like he will come in after a weekend and we'll look at the commit history and it will just be like, here's a load of new stuff. But having said that, it's really interesting because we come in and we get this wow sudden, oh look what he's made over this time that we've not been looking at it. And some of the ones, there's like Soul Solution, the galaxy effect and things like that, all of these crazy particle effects, the things with gravity wells where you've got these swirling particles happening. Those are the ones that are always, you look at them and you're in awe of it, and then you kind of panic and go, okay, how are we going to build this as well?
Is that the same workflow you still use, Luca? Do you work on the JavaScript version still to this day and the guys sort of port that one over?
Yes, at a very different rate compared to last year, but because it works well, because if you're a developer, if you get the design document in front of you, it's open to interpretation and everything, and it raises a lot of questions. If instead you have to port over something that you can already see fully implemented, that you can have access to the code as well, I think it just becomes much more straightforward. Right now, it's honestly not that important. If you make a new weapon and the weapon turns out in a different way than I made in JavaScript, not a big deal. But back when we were working on porting the main game, the new engine, that was very important to get everything exactly the same, because I wanted people to have the exact same experience. I didn't want to change things, I just wanted to be better. So basically, we had a first fully working version of this new engine already during the summer. I think it was in June, and it was performing so well. We could put so much crap on screen and it would just not drop frames at all, 0. The problem is the physics system we were using was too realistic, basically. There was friction, there were enemies bouncing on one another, and that felt wrong. That felt like a different game. I didn't feel the stupid things in Vampire Survivors with the weird arcade movements. And so because of that, we had to redo the whole physics engine. So sound effects, if you have 200 explosions on the screen, you don't want to play 200 sound effects. So there was a sound system basically to port over so that stuff sounds the same, at the same rhythm and everything. The fonts, I think there's still a problem. Yes, I see some face. The fonts took forever to get a font that didn't look as bad as the JavaScript one, but also not too good. Just, a bit of an improvement, really. And that's why it took way longer than expected to actually do the port.
And there were a lot of things like that along the way where it was kind of like, we'd implement something, we'd look at it and go, it's too clean, it's too nice, it looks too good, we need to make it crappier to kind of replicate the exact look of the original game. So it's a really interesting process, going sort of opposite to how you would normally think of, take a game and make it look better.
In an industry that is constantly trying to break new ground visually, there is something refreshing about a game which is intentionally trying to look worse. It certainly adds to the charm of Vampire Survivors and makes implementing new characters and weapons that bit easier. So while we're on the topic, I wanted to talk about possibly the roughest part of the entire game, the thing that you first see when you load up Vampire Survivors: the main menu.
So I absolutely love working with UIs. If we ignore the menu for a second, if you see like the in-game pause menu, it just doesn't appear in your face, but everything has a little animation that just makes it appear. Or when you open the Arcanas menu, I spent 3 days making sure that feels good because I really like working with UIs. But the main menu is different. The main menu doesn't have to be pretty. The main menu has to send you to the main game as quickly as possible. One of the games I played during the pandemic was One Step from Eden, which is this roguelike that I absolutely loved. And in One Step from Eden, you get absolutely beautiful menus, but on the main menu, you can just tap X or whatever 3 times and you jump immediately into a new run. And I wanted the same thing. I wanted to be able on the main menu, Vampire Survivor, just to tap a button 3 times and that's it, you're playing, don't have to worry about anything. And so that's why the menus are ugly. They're just in your face. And just like you said, as we kept adding more stuff, we just kept making the menus more complex. I'm trying to mimic that effect that I had making the game of stuff appearing only when you need it, really.
As the game grew in popularity, Luca wanted to implement more characters, weapons, and stages. Many of the ideas that hadn't made it into the game were being put together for their first DLC pack, Legacy of the Moonspell.
But before we do any of that, I wanted to go right back to the start and ask Luca what were the inspirations behind some of Vampire Survivors' more iconic weapons and characters.
How about we start with one of my favorites, the King Bible.
What to say about that? Well, first of all, I got the sprite from the asset pack and I removed the cross and put a plus sign instead, just to avoid trouble with people who might be sensitive to the actual cross. With real vampires, so who knows? Yeah, the name is a stupid pun on the name of an underground station in Rome called Re Bibbia, which in English literally translates to King Bible. This very stupid thing. Garlic, I don't know, it felt so good when I made this incredibly stupid, simple weapon that just destroys everything that touches you, or that tries to touch you. And yeah, I knew that would be the favorite weapon of most people, really. Santa Vuota is another stupid pun, because in Italian, Santa means holy. So I wanted to have something that looked as cool as the Holy Flames visual effects from Divinity 2, and I have totally not nailed it. The best weapon is the pentagram, of course. Worst weapon, clock lancet. Boring.
Is it Carello?
Carello, oh my god, no, why did you ask for that? I won't tell you the whole story, but let's just say the character is the ghost of an old lady who used to steal supermarket cards, basically, and now she's throwing them around. Originally, characters were supposed to just be a different set of stats, really. The main thing about the character was just supposed to be the starting weapon. It was supposed to be a way you choose your initial weapon. As the game got bigger, that was ridiculous to keep as an idea, so I just started to try and add something different to every character. Not those ones, though. Those ones were always supposed to be the joke characters, as if the others aren't jokes, but anyway, those were supposed to be the most weird ones, for sure. A lot of enemies definitely are similar in terms of stats, but they all have their individual stats, and they change depending on the stage of the amount of enemies as well, and all of that. I think the major differences really are between enemies that have a fixed amount of health, enemies that instead scale over time, scale with your level, basically. Other than that, there are minor skills on the enemies, but honestly, the enemies are smart enemies aren't really the point of the game. There is no AI whatsoever in the game.
But yeah, since the 1.0 release our focus did change to the DLC, didn't it? But a lot of the time on the development side, at least, outside of Luca doing the creative work and actually building the content, just went on to how do we do a DLC? How do we load DLC on a JavaScript game via Steam, via Game Pass, via, on the engine port? So there was a lot of learning for us just on that initial one, besides even building the content.
So the settings existed before. The idea to actually turn them into a DLC pack arrived sometime during the summer, because at that time I finally had all the assets I needed to actually finish the game, to make the actual ending. And then I was like, okay, what do we do now? Glober was available. Glober Kotaki is the guy who's making the pixel art for the characters. So he was available to do more work, and I was like, well, let's start into something that then we'll use somehow. And I just started to put this together in my quote-unquote spare time. When I do something new, I usually start from the tools that are available to me, because that simplifies things a lot. Of course, you won't have to struggle to actually do the implementation, of course, if you start from a feature that is already available to you in the framework.
It kind of loops back around to what Luca said right near the start about how he wanted to build something that was more of a framework for putting the content in a sense. He's built some really great systems for, ultimately everything is pretty data driven. So he can define, number of enemies that spawn at this minute and what enemies would spawn and the way they spawn. It makes it quite easy for us to sort of chop and change things, and when he's designing stages to balance all of that stuff. Yeah, it's a very flexible system. I think that's why you see such rapid content updates from Luca.
After a year of new content, the team eventually raised the cost of the game from $3 to $5, but spent weeks on Twitter telling everyone about the price hike. This consumer-first ethos has likely contributed to the insanity of their over 180,000 reviews on Steam, which still have the game rated as overwhelmingly positive.
It's very tempting to look at the success of Vampire Survivors and make broad claims about what it says about our industry. That in an era where new ideas seem so rare, a game as simple as Vampire Survivors can grab onto our imaginations so tightly.
But I think it's fair to say that in many ways Vampire Survivors is a rebuke of the grandness and complexity of large AAA games. A terrific example of the power of keeping a simple idea simple, of respecting your players' time and their wallets. But before it was any of that, before it was a multi-award-winning, breakthrough global sensation, Vampire Survivors was simply something an Italian immigrant living in London worked on to flex his creative muscles, to create something his friends would enjoy playing, to escape his day job and make something that would make him smile. It's just that it turned out it made a lot of us smile too.